My name is Claire, I'm 29 and I've spent most of my life being the background noise in someone else's spotlight. If you asked anyone in my family who the star was, they'd answer without hesitation, Jake. My younger brother. The golden boy. The one who made varsity football as a freshman, landed a full scholarship to play for a Division I school, and now, somehow, manages to live in a downtown high-rise despite changing jobs every 6 months. Me? I'm the accountant. The one who stayed quiet, played it safe, and never needed help. Not because I didn't need anything, but because I learned early on that the only currency that mattered in our family was charisma. Jake had it in spades. I had calculators. If you, like me, grew up in someone else's shadow, I know how heavy that silence can feel. Hit that like button and I'll tell you the story of how I finally found my voice. Growing up in a suburb just outside San Antonio, we weren't poor, but we weren't far from it either. Dad worked long hours as a mechanic, and Mom picked up shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide. Money was tight, but they stretched every dollar to support Jake's sports camps, gear, and travel teams. I never resented that, not really. I figured out how to work the system from the sidelines. While Jake was at football practice, I was reading about compound interest. By the time I turned 21, I had saved enough from my part-time job at a local credit union to buy my first small condo. Nothing glamorous, a one-bedroom unit in an aging complex, but I rented it out and covered the mortgage. I kept living at home to save more. Within 2 years, I had a second unit. Then a duplex. And I did it all without ever breathing a word to my family. It wasn't secrecy so much as survival. Any time I tried to talk about work or my small wins, the conversation quickly shifted back to Jake. His new girlfriend. His touchdown last weekend. His internship at some sportswear company that was just a stepping stone, even though it paid more than my first full-time job. I let it go. I smiled and nodded through the birthday dinners and Sunday cookouts, listening to my parents gush over Jake's latest exploits while I washed dishes in the kitchen. I didn't need the applause. I told myself that over and over. My success was quiet, but real. And one day, I figured, it would speak for itself. That day came in the form of a group text. Family barbecue next Saturday at Jake's place, the message read. Sent by my mom, with a handful of emojis and a note about bringing side dishes. We're celebrating Jake's new job and apartment. I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a thumbs up. No one asked if I had plans. No one asked if I had something to celebrate. But I knew how this would go. Jake would be the star of the day, showing off his latest luxury lease and modern apartment, while I'd be asked for help with someone's taxes and then politely ignored. Still, I wasn't going to skip it. That wasn't how I operated. Besides, part of me wanted to see the place, see Jake in his element, and remind myself why I chose a different path. The week leading up to the barbecue, I buried myself in work. I had just signed on 2 new clients through word-of-mouth referrals, both small businesses looking for help managing cash flow and quarterly taxes. I stayed late at my office downtown, a modest but cozy space in a converted Victorian, and avoided the group chat, which was now flooded with RSVPs, menu debates, and pictures Jake sent of his building's rooftop pool. Friday night, I stopped by the store to pick up ingredients for the pasta salad I'd bring. As I wheeled my cart down the aisle, I overheard a couple arguing about money, credit card debt, a missed car payment, the usual stressors. I couldn't help but do the math in my head, figuring out what they could cut, where they could consolidate, how they might breathe easier with just a few changes. That's the thing about numbers. They always make sense. People? Not so much. Saturday came faster than I expected. I stood in front of my closet longer than I care to admit, trying to decide what to wear. It felt ridiculous, worrying about my outfit for a family barbecue, but I knew the crowd. Jake's friends would be there. Probably some coworkers. The kind of people who say things like, "Oh, you're still renting?" with a smile that doesn't reach their eyes. In the end, I chose a simple navy blouse and dark jeans. Classic. Unassuming. comfortable. I wore my hair down and added small gold hoops. I looked in the mirror and reminded myself, you're not here to impress anyone. The drive to Jake's building took 20 minutes. It was in one of the trendiest parts of the city, a mix of sleek high-rises and bougie coffee shops with single-origin beans and minimalist decor. I found street parking a few blocks away and walked, carrying my salad and trying not to second-guess everything. Jake's building was, predictably, flashy. Floor-to-ceiling windows, valet service, even a concierge desk. I took the elevator up to the 10th floor and followed the noise to apartment 1003. Laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue met me before I even knocked. Jake opened the door, grinning. He wore a fitted polo and designer sneakers. Claire. You made it. Look at you, all city chic. Hey, Jake, I said, smiling politely. Nice place. Right? Wait till you see the balcony. It's insane. Come in, come in. As I stepped inside, I braced myself. The show was about to begin. Jake's apartment was exactly what I expected, high ceilings, open layout, and the kind of minimalist modern decor that looks like it was pulled straight from an influencer's Instagram. It was the kind of place that didn't say, I live here, but rather, someone like me should live here. A statement more about image than comfort. He led me into the kitchen, all glossy quartz and brushed stainless steel, then motioned toward the folding table already sagging under aluminum trays and side dishes. Set your salad there, he said, already half turning toward the sound of a new arrival. Uncle Ray brought brisket. We're doing it big. I placed the bowl on the table and surveyed the room. A mix of Jake's work friends, old teammates, extended family, and a few people I barely recognized. Laughter echoed from the balcony, glasses clinked, and the whole place smelled like smoke, spice, and charred perfection. Claire, my mom called as she breezed in from the balcony, her sunglasses still perched on top of her head. We were wondering when you'd show up. She pulled me in for a brief hug, then held me at arm's length. Isn't this apartment something else? I mean, look at this view. It's nice, I said, glancing out at the skyline. Nice, she echoed with a light laugh. It's amazing. Your brother's really doing well, huh? I smiled, but it didn't feel like my mouth got the message. This was always the dynamic. Jake shines, and the rest of us orbit around his light, careful not to cast shadows. Dad joined us a minute later, holding a beer and already mid-praise. This boy, I swear. Moved out, landed a new job, and now this place? He's on fire. Hey, Claire, Jake said, reappearing at my side with two colleagues trailing behind him. Come meet the crew. This is Brett and Kayla, they're part of my team over at the agency. We exchanged polite handshakes, and Kayla smiled warmly. Jake's told us so much about you. You're an accountant, right? Yeah, I said. I run a small firm downtown. Nice, Brett replied, eyes already drifting. Must be pretty chill. Busy during tax season, I said, the familiar brush-off rising in my throat like reflex. But I like it. You should have her do your taxes, Jake chimed in with a laugh. Unless you want the IRS knocking. I forced a chuckle as they moved on, then retreated to the edge of the balcony where I could watch the crowd without participating in it. I took a sip of soda, stared out at the rooftops, and tried to will the pressure in my chest to ease. There you are, came a familiar voice. My cousin Ben leaned against the railing beside me, paper plate in hand. You hiding? Just taking a breather, I said. How's the baby? Teething. No one's sleeping. He grinned. You know, parenthood. I nodded. Sounds intense. He forked a bite of brisket into his mouth, then said through a half-chew, meant to ask, how's that new duplex going? Still renting both units? I blinked. That sentence, so casually dropped, so innocent, fell like a grenade into the moment. What duplex? My mother's voice cut in from behind us. She'd apparently been eavesdropping, Or maybe just close enough to hear. Ben looked between us. The one Claire bought last year. Over on Maple Ridge? You didn't know? My father appeared next to her, frowning. Maple Ridge? Those places go for a fortune. Jake, halfway through a joke with someone inside, caught the shift in tone and wandered over. What's going on? She owns a duplex, Mom said, staring at me. Since when? Now all eyes were on me. I took a deep breath. Since last spring. My mom's eyebrows shot up. And you didn't think to mention that? I wasn't hiding it, I said slowly, I just never thought it would come up. Ben looked sheepish. Sorry, I thought you'd already told them. No harm, I said, waving it off, but the tension in the air was already cementing. Jake crossed his arms. Wait, you own property? I nodded. A few places. A few, my dad repeated, as if the concept defied logic. Yeah. I've been investing for a while now. Started small, reinvested, kept expenses low. I paused. It added up. Jake's laugh was short and sharp. You mean while we were all thinking you were just quietly crunching numbers in that little office, you were out there building an empire? It's not an empire, I said. Just a portfolio. Why wouldn't you say anything? My mom asked, visibly hurt. We're your family. I hesitated. Because every time I tried to share something, about work or my goals, it got buried under updates about Jake's career or new car or whatever. After a while, it felt easier to just stay quiet. Silence. For the first time in years, the focus of the gathering had shifted. Jake wasn't the one with the surprise. I was. And no one quite knew what to do with it. Jake's jaw tightened. You made me look like an idiot. I raised an eyebrow. How? I didn't say anything. You just assumed. Ben quickly muttered something about needing another beer and vanished, leaving me with the stunned stares of my parents and a brother whose ego had just taken a direct hit. Excuse me, I said quietly, stepping back inside. I needed air. Not from outside, but from the pressure building inside the walls of that perfect, pristine apartment. For once, the spotlight had found me. And nobody, not even me, was ready for it. I spent the next 10 minutes pretending to refill my drink while trying to slow my breathing. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Every laugh, every clink of silverware, every shifting glance in my direction felt magnified. I knew this day would be about Jake, but I hadn't expected to become the unintended plot twist. I stood near the kitchen island, staring down at the condensation collecting on my soda can. I could feel eyes on me, but I didn't look up. I focused on the countertop, white quartz with faint gray veining, and thought about how much it probably cost per square foot. Jake finally reappeared, walking like someone who wasn't sure how to act in his own home. His usual swagger was muted. He stopped a few feet away from me. You really never planned on telling anyone? He asked, voice low. I glanced up. What would have been the point? I don't know, transparency, he said, half laughing, but there was no humor in it. I never lied, Jake. You just never asked. His jaw clenched. So while I've been busting my ass trying to keep up with rent and job hunting, you've been sitting on, what, how many properties? I shrugged. 7. His eyes widened. 7? I nodded. Jesus, Claire. I folded my arms. Look, this isn't about making you feel bad. I just chose a different path. One that didn't involve showing off. You think I'm showing off? I gave him a long look. You have framed photos of your car on your walls, Jake. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's not untrue. He looked away for a second, jaw working like he was chewing on something tough. Why didn't you trust us with this? I didn't trust being dismissed, I replied. There's a difference. The doorbell rang, and the moment broke. Jake muttered something and went to answer it. I used the chance to retreat to the balcony again. My mom was out there now, talking with Aunt Nancy, but she turned when she saw me. Sweets, she said gently, can we talk? Sure. She motioned to a pair of patio chairs tucked into the corner. Saturday, I didn't realize you felt overshadowed, she said. I watched the sun dip behind the buildings. It's not about feeling overshadowed. It's about never being seen in the first place. Her brow furrowed. We've always loved you, Claire. I know, I said quickly. This isn't about love. It's about recognition. Support. Interest. Mom was quiet for a moment, then said, You've always been so independent. We just figured you didn't need much from us. I needed you to care. Just a little. Maybe ask how work was going without immediately pivoting to Jake's latest milestone. She blinked, and I realized she might honestly never have thought about it like that. I'm sorry, she said finally. We failed you there. I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat. Thanks. She reached over and squeezed my hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Later, as we all gathered around the dining area for dessert, the shift in energy was palpable. Jake was quieter, less animated. A few people came up to me with hesitant smiles and awkward small talk, like I'd suddenly become a stranger in their midst. You should talk to people about what you do, my Aunt Nancy said. There are kids in the family who could learn a lot from you. I thanked her but didn't commit. I wasn't ready to become a teacher yet. This day had already forced me to be more visible than I'd ever wanted to be. As the party began to wind down, Jake cornered me near the coat rack. I owe you an apology, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Okay. I didn't mean to put you down earlier. I was just surprised. Embarrassed, maybe. I raised an eyebrow. Embarrassed? I've been out here trying to impress everyone with whatever this is. He gestured vaguely around his apartment, and you've been quietly winning the long game. I smiled faintly. It's not a competition, Jake. Easy for you to say when you're winning. That made me laugh. Genuinely. Seriously, he added. I'm not good with money. I make it, I spend it. I have nothing to show for it half the time. Maybe you could help me. Help you how? I don't know. Budgeting? Investing? Something. I considered him for a long moment. Are you actually ready to listen? He nodded. I think so. Then yeah. I'll help. His shoulders relaxed, and he offered a crooked grin. I'll even pay you. Damn right you will, I said, and we both laughed. We didn't hug. We're not that kind of siblings. But something shifted, something real. Not a performance. Not for show. As I drove home that night, I played the events over in my mind like a reel. The reveal, the confrontation, the conversations. None of it had gone how I'd imagined. And yet, somehow, the crack in the foundation had let in a little light. For the first time, I wasn't just background noise. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to speak up. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even opened my eyes. A text from Mom, Dad and I were talking last night. Would you be open to coming by this week for dinner? For a second, I just stared at the message. We hadn't had a proper sit-down that wasn't for a birthday or holiday in years. I didn't know if I was ready, but something in me was tired of avoidance. Sure, I typed back. Thursday work? She replied instantly. Perfect. We'll cook. Just us. It was hard not to read too much into that last part. Just us. No cousins, no neighbors stopping by, no Jake. I went through the motions that Monday, meetings with clients, payroll audits, organizing receipts from a small bakery owner who kept them in literal shoeboxes. Numbers brought comfort, order. They didn't interrupt or deflect. They didn't change the subject mid-sentence to ask how Jake's new sales job was going. Still, my thoughts kept drifting back to the barbecue. The stunned expressions. The way Jake looked at me like I'd tricked him. My parents' confusion and guilt. Thursday came faster than I expected. I left work early, stopped at a bakery to pick up dessert, and drove the familiar route to my childhood home. The house looked the same, tan siding, slightly sloping driveway, wind chimes clinking near the porch. But I felt different walking up those steps. Not like the girl they used to overlook. Not anymore. Mom answered the door with a tight smile and a too cheerful, "There's my girl." She gave me a hug that lingered a second longer than usual. Inside, the kitchen smelled like garlic and oregano. Dad was stirring a pot on the stove, eyebrows raised in greeting. "Smells good," I said, setting the dessert on the counter. "Chicken parm," Dad replied. "Your favorite, right?" I nodded, surprised he remembered. We sat down to eat, and the conversation started off safe. Work. The weather. Traffic on I-35. I let them lead, waiting for the inevitable shift. It came after the first round of awkward silence. "So," Mom said, folding her napkin. "You really own 7 properties?" I swallowed a bite of pasta. "Technically, 6 rentals and my office building." "So, yeah." "How?" Dad asked. Not with skepticism, but genuine curiosity. "I started with a small condo," I explained. "Bought it cheap, rented it out, used the income to buy the next one. I've just kept scaling since." They both nodded slowly. "We always thought you were doing okay," Mom said. "But we had no idea." "Because you never asked," I said, and immediately regretted the sharpness. Mom winced. "That's fair." I didn't mean it to sound harsh, I softened. "It's just, whenever I tried to share, it never stuck." I stopped trying. "We didn't know," Dad said. "We should have asked better questions." I shrugged. "It's in the past." "No," he said, "but it matters. We thought we were treating both of you equally, but now I see that we weren't really paying attention." "I wasn't flashy," I said. "And in this family, if you're not loud, you're invisible." That landed hard. I could see it in their eyes. A moment of clarity they hadn't expected. "We're proud of you," Mom said, reaching for my hand. "We always were. We just didn't know what you were doing." I didn't want the attention, I admitted. At first, it felt good to fly under the radar. Then it became a habit. A wall. Dad leaned back in his chair. "Jake said you two talked." I nodded. "Yeah. He wants help with budgeting." He snorted. "Good luck with that." "Hey, people change," I said. He asked. "That's something." Mom smiled softly. "He told us he felt ashamed. Said he's been measuring success by the wrong yardstick." That surprised me. "Really?" "Really," she said. "He said you were the first person to make him actually question how he's been living." I took that in, unsure what to say. It was easier to believe Jake was oblivious. Harder to accept that he might be reflecting. After dinner, we sat on the couch flipping through old photo albums, something we hadn't done in years. Pictures of Jake in football uniforms, me at piano recitals. Family vacations. Birthday cakes. Grad caps. "Remember this?" Dad said, pointing at a photo of me at age 10, holding a math trophy almost as big as my head. "Regional Math B," I said. "5th grade." "You were so proud that day," Mom added. "We should have made a bigger deal." "You were busy cheering for Jake's playoff game," I said before I could stop myself. They both looked down. No one said anything for a moment. "We can't go back," Mom finally said. "But we can do better now." And strangely, I believed her. As I left that night, Mom hugged me tighter than usual and Dad walked me to my car. It felt like a start. Not a fix. But a start. The next day, I got a text from Jake, "Hey, you free Sunday? Want to sit down and look at my finances?" I stared at it for a minute before replying. "Yeah. Let's do it." I didn't know what would come from it. But for the first time, I wasn't the one doing the adjusting. They were meeting me where I was. And it felt like solid ground. Jake arrived on Sunday afternoon looking like a toned-down version of himself. No flashy designer shirt, no expensive sunglasses. Just jeans, sneakers, and a plain gray t-shirt. He even brought coffee. "Peace offering," he said, holding out the to-go cup like it was sacred. I smirked. "Accepted. Let's see what kind of damage we're working with." He gave a sheepish laugh. "That bad, huh?" We sat at my dining table, just the two of us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no tension, no snark. Just curiosity. Hesitation. A thread of humility I hadn't seen in him in years. Jake pulled a small folder from his backpack. "Okay, full disclosure, I don't even know what half of this is." "That's fine," I said, flipping open my laptop. "We start from where you are, not where you wish you were." Inside the folder were pay stubs, bank statements, and printouts of his credit card bills. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't a disaster either. Just typical. He made good money but lived as if he made more. No savings. No investments. No plan. "All right," I said after about 15 minutes of scanning and organizing. "Let's start here. You're spending about 95% of your monthly income, which leaves almost no breathing room." "Yeah," he muttered. "Feels like it." I turned my laptop so he could see a quick chart I'd built. "Most of it goes to your apartment, car lease, restaurants, and random Amazon purchases." Jake stared at it. "That's horrifying." "It's not unusual," I said. "But it's unsustainable. You're living paycheck to paycheck in a $3,000 suit." He groaned and slumped back in his chair. "I thought I was being responsible. You know, paying my bills, showing up for work." "You are responsible," I said gently. "But being responsible and being strategic aren't always the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. "So what do I do?" "We build a new structure," I said. "First, you need a budget. A real one. Not just mental math at the end of each month." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Second, we tackle your debt, starting with the credit card carrying the highest interest rate. Then we set up an emergency fund." "Emergency fund," he repeated. "That's like, for car repairs and stuff?" "Exactly. Or job loss. Or medical bills. You want at least 3 months of expenses eventually." Jake made a face. "Sounds impossible." "It's not. But it takes discipline." He glanced at my apartment. "You really live like this all the time?" I shrugged. "I like it. I know where every dollar goes. I spend intentionally." "And you still manage to go on trips, buy property, all that?" "Because I plan for those things. I don't spend emotionally. I spend strategically." Jake shook his head. "I envy that. My idea of planning is checking if my card still swipes." We both laughed, and something eased between us. Over the next hour, I walked him through free budgeting tools, showed him how to track his net income, and explained the 50/30/20 rule: 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings and debt. We talked about cutting unnecessary expenses, negotiating better rates, even subletting the second parking spot in his building. "I had no idea there were so many ways to save," he said, scrolling through the spreadsheet I'd built for him. "That's the thing. Most people aren't taught this. They figure it out the hard way, after a crisis." Jake leaned back, watching me closely. So how did you learn all this? Trial and error? Mostly books. Forums. Podcasts. I started with budgeting apps when I was in college. I liked the control it gave me. Once I had that foundation, I just kept building. He looked thoughtful. You ever think about teaching this? Like professionally? I do, I admitted. But accounting pays well, and I like the work. Still, I've been thinking of starting a blog or something. You'd be great at it, he said sincerely. Honestly. You made this stuff make sense. Thanks, I said. And for a second, I felt it, not pride exactly, but something quieter and more powerful, recognition. Jake stood and stretched. Okay, I feel equal parts overwhelmed and inspired. That's a good place to start. He hesitated at the door. I meant what I said at the party. You've really built something incredible. I think I always saw you as just doing fine. But you're more than fine. Thanks, I said. And thanks for being willing to ask for help. That's not nothing. He smirked. Let's not get too sentimental. Don't worry, I said. You'll still hate me when I make you track every penny next month. He grinned, saluted me with his coffee cup, and walked out. After he left, I sat back down, still absorbing the shift in our relationship. There was a weight to this kind of honesty, but it wasn't heavy in a bad way. It felt grounding. Later that night, I pulled out my planning notebook, the one I used for investment forecasts and long-term goals. I turned to a clean page and wrote at the top. Jake's plan. It wasn't just about budgets and spreadsheets anymore. It was about reconnecting. About shifting the balance in a family that had tilted for too long. One conversation at a time. One ledger at a time. The week after Jake and I met was oddly quiet. No sarcastic texts about budgeting apps, no memes about living off rice and beans, no sudden requests to review a car lease. Just 2 check-ins, one asking if he should switch banks to avoid monthly fees, yes, and another about whether he should close his old store credit card from college, not yet. He was doing the work, slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. I was in the middle of reviewing a lease renewal for a tenant in one of my duplexes when my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Lily. Hey, I heard you're like the family finance wizard now faced with tears of joy. Mind if I ask you something? I stared at it for a second. Lily and I weren't especially close. We'd grown up attending the same family gatherings, shared a few adolescent sleepovers, but our adult lives had gone in very different directions. She had a 2-year-old, a retail job, and an ex-boyfriend who was more ghost than co-parent. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. Of course, I typed. What's up? The reply came fast. Honestly? I'm drowning. Credit cards, daycare, groceries. I don't know how to stay afloat. Can I call you sometime? We picked a time for the next evening. I expected a 10-minute conversation. What I got was a window into just how deep the struggle ran. When the call started, Lily's hair was in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes, her toddler babbling in the background. She looked tired in a way makeup couldn't fix. Thanks for doing this, she said. I feel kinda stupid asking. I should know this stuff. No one teaches it, I said. You're not stupid. You're just surviving. She nodded, looking down. It feels like every month I patch one hole and spring 2 more. We spent the next hour digging through her situation. She'd maxed out 2 credit cards, had a third with a terrifying interest rate, and was spending over 60% of her income on childcare alone. Her job had recently cut her hours, and she'd started using buy now pay later apps to cover groceries. I open the fridge, she said, and start mentally subtracting what I owe on each meal. That hit me hard. Not as a finance professional, but as a woman, a cousin, a human being. I muted for a moment to grab a notebook, then said, okay. Let's start small. Do you know your exact income and fixed expenses? She shook her head. I've never written it down. It's like I'm scared to see the truth. I get that, I said. But seeing it gives you power. Not looking doesn't make the debt disappear, it just lets it grow without boundaries. We made a simple budget. I showed her how to track spending with a free app, and how to call her credit card companies to ask about hardship programs. By the end of the call, we'd built a plan with 3 immediate actions and a timeline that felt possible. She looked like she might cry. I just want to breathe again, she said. You will, I told her. One step at a time. After the call, I sat in my dim living room, the hum of the fridge suddenly louder. I hadn't felt this kind of emotional weight after a work call in years. But it didn't feel draining, it felt urgent. Important. So I did what I always did when a problem kept pulling at me, I started organizing it. I opened a new document on my laptop and typed a rough headline, Money Without Shame. It was meant to be a single post, just for myself. A reflection on what I'd told Lily, stripped of jargon. But the words kept flowing. Soon, I had the bones of 3 articles. Budgeting for people who hate budgets, practical, honest, no BS. What to do when you're drowning in debt, not theoretical. Real, actionable steps. Emergency funds, why you need one, even if you're broke, because life never gives you advance notice. By the end of the night, I had a name, off the record. Because that's how these conversations always happened. Not at a bank. Not during a consultation. But after hours. In kitchens, in DMs, in whispered panic. Quietly. Privately. Off the record. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Jake. Not even Lily. I bought a domain, set up a basic layout, and started writing. It felt vulnerable but exciting. Like I was finally doing something that had weight beyond my own financial goals. But word travels. 2 days later, Lily texted me a screenshot. I shared your article draft with a friend who works at the East Side Community Center. They loved it. Would you maybe be open to doing a free workshop? My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't a public speaker. I didn't have a PhD in economics. I hadn't even published a blog post yet. What could I possibly offer? But I couldn't shake Lily's face from the video call, or the way she exhaled when we built her first budget. I thought of every time I'd overheard financial distress in grocery store aisles, whispered behind closed doors, shrugged off in family dinners like failure was just part of the deal. So I said yes. The workshop was scheduled for a Thursday evening in a community room behind the local library. The walls were faded, the folding chairs mismatched, and the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. Only 6 people showed up. But they listened. Really listened. I opened with, "Hi, I'm Claire. I'm not here to sell you a course. I'm not an influencer. I just want to talk about money in a way that doesn't make you feel stupid." They smiled. They nodded. One woman cried. And for the first time, I realized that maybe the life I'd built in quiet, one spreadsheet at a time, wasn't just mine to keep. By the second workshop, there were 15 people in the room. It was held in the same quiet, drafty library conference room behind the East Side Community Center, but something felt different. Maybe it was the extra chairs. Maybe it was the low buzz of quiet conversations before we began. Or maybe it was the anticipation. People weren't just curious now, they were hopeful. Monique, the center director, introduced me with that same wide smile and warm tone, calling me a local financial guide, which made me want to melt into the carpet. "I'm not a guru," I told the group. "I'm not here to sell you anything. I just want to talk about money in a way that doesn't make you feel like crap." They laughed, some nervously, others with real relief. The room was a mix of young parents, older retirees, single professionals. No financial experts. Just people who were tired of pretending they had it all figured out. I kept it simple. I used real-life examples. I showed how $1 could stretch or disappear depending on the choices you made. I shared how I'd once been terrified to open my own bills. How fear kept me stuck longer than poverty ever did. A man in his 50s raised his hand halfway through. What do you do when the shame is so bad, you can't even log into your bank app? The room quieted. Everyone had that look, the one that says I've been there. You start small, I said. You log in for 60 seconds. Just look at the balance. That's it. Tomorrow, you look again. The shame doesn't go away overnight, but information gives you power. One step at a time. Later, after the chairs had been folded up and the coffee cups tossed, I stayed behind to answer questions. I expected a few people. I ended up there for nearly an hour. One woman asked how to talk to her teenager about money without sounding hypocritical. Another confessed she'd been hiding credit card debt from her husband for years. I didn't know people like you existed, one woman told me. Someone who understands this stuff but also gets what it feels like to be stuck. It made my chest tighten, in the best way. When I got home that night, I didn't collapse like I usually did. I sat at my kitchen table, lit a candle, and opened my laptop. I started drafting another post. Then another. The ideas kept pouring out. Financial survival mode, how to function when you're running on fumes. How to say no without guilt, especially to family. Fixing your money story without fixing your entire life. By midnight, I had a full week's worth of content queued for off the record. My little blog, which had started as a whisper to myself, was slowly becoming a conversation. The next morning, I got a text from Jake. Jake, can we talk this weekend? Been thinking about some stuff. Me, sure. Everything okay? Jake, yeah. Just reflecting, I guess. More soon. I wasn't sure what to expect. Jake didn't reflect. He made decisions, declarations, and dramatic comebacks. But now, his texts felt slower. More measured. When I showed up at his place on Saturday morning, coffee in hand, he looked tired, but not the way he used to look after a long night. This was internal fatigue. Emotional wear. Everything okay? I asked as I stepped inside. He didn't answer right away. Just motioned toward the couch. I've been thinking about what you said. About purpose. About being invisible. I tilted my head. That's a shift. He sighed and dropped onto the couch. I always thought being the center of attention meant I was winning. Like if people were watching me, I must be doing something right. And now? He looked up. Now I feel like I've spent half my life performing. Not just for the family, but for myself. Like I was trying to convince myself I mattered. His voice cracked slightly on that last word, and I felt it in my chest. I looked around this apartment the other night, he continued. And I realized. I don't even like half the stuff in here. I bought it for the image. For Instagram. You can change it, I said gently. You're allowed to evolve. He nodded. That's what scares me. That I don't even know who I am under all this decoration. I let the silence sit for a minute. I thought you were boring, he said suddenly. For years. I said it out loud. I believed it. I laughed, not to mock him, but because the honesty was so sharp, so Jake. I know, I said. You weren't exactly subtle. He smiled, sheepish. But now I think you were just grounded. You knew who you were. I envied that, even if I didn't understand it. I leaned back. It wasn't confidence. It was self-preservation. If I couldn't be seen for who I was, I made peace with being unseen. Until I couldn't anymore. He looked at me, really looked. So what changed? I realized invisibility wasn't keeping me safe. It was just keeping me small. He nodded slowly, filing the thought away. Then, something unexpected, he stood, crossed the room, and pulled down the framed photo of his car from the wall. Without ceremony, he placed it on the floor by the door. I think it's time I start decorating for who I want to be, he said. I smiled. That's a good start. When I left later that afternoon, Jake walked me to my car. Just before I got in, he pulled me into a hug, full, sincere, no pretense. It was the kind of hug we hadn't shared since we were kids. Before performance, before pressure. Before we forgot how to just be people. And for once, we weren't reflections of who we used to be. We were mirrors, showing each other who we could still become. I didn't mean for it to go viral. It started with a quote. I'd taken a screenshot of one of my blog paragraphs and posted it to Off the Record's new Instagram page. Just a simple square, white text on a muted green background. You're not bad with money. You were never taught. And shame was never part of the lesson plan. I added a caption about breaking cycles, tagged no one, and logged off. When I checked back a few hours later, it had over 4,000 likes. By morning, it had crossed 10,000. By the end of the week, the blog subscribers had doubled. Then tripled. The comments section was filled with people tagging friends, partners, siblings. Why did this hit like a therapy session? I didn't know I needed to hear this until I did. It was surreal. My inbox flooded. I got messages from teachers, single moms, social workers, small business owners, people who felt like they were finally allowed to ask questions they'd spent years too ashamed to speak aloud. I tried to respond to as many as I could. But it was overwhelming. The good kind, mostly. But still overwhelming. A week later, a podcast host named Nicole reached out. She ran a popular personal finance show with a strong following, especially among millennial women, and asked if I'd be willing to do an interview. My instinct was to say no. The idea of recording my voice, being asked questions I hadn't prepared for, letting strangers interpret my words, it all made my stomach knot. But then I remembered that anonymous comment, I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago. What if the podcast reached the version of that person who was still struggling? I said yes. We recorded over Zoom. Nicole was kind, sharp, and generous. She let me talk about my blog, my background, the workshops, even Jake and Lily. I kept it raw. No branding spiel. Just my story. At the end, she said, Claire, what would you say to someone listening right now who feels like they've already failed financially? I took a breath. I'd say you haven't failed. You've survived. And surviving without the tools you needed isn't failure, it's resilience. Now you get to start again, this time with a little more information, and a lot less shame. When the episode aired a week later, my phone didn't stop buzzing for days. Jake called after listening. You sounded like someone who actually enjoys talking about this stuff. I do, I admitted. Turns out, helping people feels better than hoarding knowledge. He laughed. Look at you. The reluctant guru. Lily texted too, cried twice listening to your voice. In a good way. But the most surprising response came from Dad. A voice message, his first ever. Hey, Claire, your mom played the podcast for me while we were driving to Costco. I listened to the whole thing. Twice. I just want you to know, I'm learning from you. And I'm proud. So damn proud. I sat on my couch and listened to it 3 times. Then saved it. Not everything had changed with my parents. There were still awkward moments, still decades of missed connection to patch up. But something had shifted. I wasn't the quiet daughter in the background anymore. I was becoming someone they looked to, not through. The next workshop at the community center was packed. 32 people showed up. We had to bring in folding chairs from the basement. A woman approached me afterward. Late 20s, wearing scrubs and holding a spiral notebook filled with notes. I used to think budgeting was punishment, she said. But you made it feel like self-respect. I blinked. That's exactly it. Also, she added, I started my emergency fund last week. It's only $20, but I feel unstoppable. We laughed. And then, we hugged. That night, I updated the Off the Record homepage. I added a new section. You are not broken. You are learning. Welcome. Then I sat back and stared at the screen for a long time. For years, I'd kept my voice small. Efficient. Contained. I believed that being invisible protected me from judgment, from pressure, from failure. Now, I realized it had also protected me from possibility. The spotlight wasn't something I'd ever chased. But now that I was standing in it, reluctantly, humbly, I didn't want to run anymore. Not because I wanted fame. But because someone, somewhere, still believed they were bad with money. And if I could be loud enough, clear enough, kind enough for them to hear something different, then it was worth it. All of it. The morning of my keynote, I burned my toast. It felt oddly fitting. Even with everything in order, life sneaks in reminders, you're still human. I wasn't supposed to be the keynote. The original speaker canceled, and someone on the conference team had seen Off the Record. They asked me to fill in, just a 20-minute talk on financial literacy and emotion. I said yes. Not because I felt ready, but because I knew someone might need to hear what I had to say. The event was small, held in a college auditorium. No spotlight. Just folding chairs, a stage, and a modest audience of teachers, nonprofit leaders, and community workers. Backstage, I thought of everyone who had helped me get here: Jake, Lily, Tanya. The readers who'd written in, the anonymous commenters, the workshop attendees. People who chose to begin again, quietly. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage and took a breath. Hi, I said. I'm Claire. I talk about money, but not in the way most people do. A few heads lifted. A few smiles. I talk about the side of money that gets overlooked. The part that ties your worth to your bank balance. The part that convinces you you're failing when you're really just surviving. I told my story. Not a polished success tale, just the truth. About learning alone. Failing quietly. Building slowly. About realizing invisibility doesn't protect you, it isolates you. And we don't fix what we don't talk about. I shared stories from my blog, my workshops. I talked about Lily opening her savings account. Tanya starting over. Jake learning to budget and learning who he really was. I spoke of shame and silence and the power of naming things. At the end, I said, you don't have to be loud to make change. But you do have to speak. Because someone's waiting for a story that sounds like theirs, to know they're not alone. The applause was soft at first, then steady. Afterward, people came up to talk. Some had programs they wanted to start. Others just said thank you. One woman, a financial educator, told me, you reminded me why I do this. Later, I checked my phone. A text from Jake. Heard about the speech. Mom's bragging. Just wanted to say, I see you. Also, maxed out my Roth IRA. Who even am I? I laughed, standing there in the hum of a quiet auditorium, knowing everything had changed, and yet I was still me. At home that night, I lit a candle and opened my journal. On a fresh page, I wrote. Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what you build, one conversation, one story, one choice at a time. Then I opened the blog and wrote a new post. This is not the end. Because it never was. Just a beginning. That's my story. Now I'd love to hear yours. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Share your experience in the comments, and let's discuss it.